Hello, Kate from FerretTube TV here. It's my great pleasure to announce today's book launch, and that is authored by Andrea Emblin. The book title is Lady Hartley's Husbands. It is a historical fiction novel in terms of genre. And here's a bit of ferret-related blurb for you. Andrea Emblin's The Lady Hartley's Husbands is set in early to mid-20th century England. It revolves around the relationships and secrets of its characters, themes that resonate with the keeping of ferrets. They are the bonds between animals and people. In particular, that when trust is assumed too quickly, it might result in being unexpectedly bitten from behind. They sometimes bite from the front as well, primarily the nose or the eyebrow. But that said, I hope you enjoyed today's book launch.
Andrea Emblin, Lady Hartley's Husbands. Historical fiction's not mainstream for fantastic books, but we've always looked at novels on their own merits. As with the vast majority of debut novels that have come to us, we didn't immediately accept it, but because it had a good cast, a strong plot, and had come from someone who could clearly write well, I turned it over to one of my editors to have a look and provide a detailed report to the author. Our editorial reports, by the way, are a key part of our USP, our unique selling point. When we're open for submissions, we've always provided written feedback. It has paid out in the number and quality of fiction that has come back to us, and it paid out with this one. Andrea took the time to reshape the parts of the story that didn't flow as well as they might, and came back to us with a book that crackles with human drama and provides a fascinating glimpse into the lives of women in the early to mid-20th century.
Cornwall, May 1938. Something was brewing, but Reenie was determined to make the most of the day. She stepped outside the cottage and breathed in the scent of hawthorn. It was a bright morning, and every tree defined its newfound growth with a rich vibrancy against an azure sky. A stiffening breeze promised a bracing walk across the bay and filled her with longing. At 16 years old, she deserved to be free of her mother's fussing, free to feel the sand between her toes and the shallows washing round her ankles. She slipped back inside, put on her costume, then pulled her blouse and skirt over the top. She was ready. "Going for a swim on your own?" said her mother, frowning. "I won't be long. It's safe as houses down there." Her father lowered his newspaper and peered at her. "Be careful, my love. There can be an undertow, depending on the currents." Reenie sighed. "I'll be careful. I'm only paddling anyway." She blew them a kiss before further argument kept her inside a minute longer, and made her way to the path zigzagging down to the beach. The nearer she drew to the sea, the stronger the wind blew, tossing her long wavy hair in equal rebellion. Salt flavoured her lips. Gulls wheeled overhead, their raucous cry mocking her feet as they ploughed through soft sand. Deciding on the spot where she should leave her clothes, she kicked off her sandals and stripped down to her costume, her favourite, with the colours almost matching the sea. Then she padded across the sandbars that emulated the ripples that had formed them, and splashed through broad pools left behind by the tide. A turquoise sea with headland to her left and sand dunes petering out to her right merged with the horizon, glimmering in the sunlight, beckoning to her. 2 other bathers had beaten her to it, though only one had dared to immerse his shoulders. Reenie strode towards the foam curling on the shore, determined to leave at least a damp line on her costume. With one deep breath she inched into the sea until the numbing swell smacked against her thighs. There was nothing for it but to do her usual. An instant plunge, then a mad crawl, front, back, sideways, anything to recirculate her frozen bloodstream. Once sensation returned to her body, she relaxed into a less serious breaststroke, swivelling to make for the beach. So why was someone shouting? Were they pointing behind her? She turned. A vast green wall towered over her, froth boiling at its crest. Reenie's heart skipped. Was the time to make it to the shore? In the next second, an ocean of water seethed and pounded overhead. Frantically, her hands struck out in an effort to rise above the turmoil, but it was hopeless. She tumbled over and over, a rag doll shaken by a hound, utterly at its mercy. The roaring in her ears terrified her as much as the impossibility of one vital gasp of air. In the darkness of this underwater world, all other sound was eclipsed. Panic swept through her, squeezing her lungs tighter, dizzying her head, sucking out the strength to fight for her life. One more breath, that's all I need. Her thoughts spun like the foam itself, until hands suddenly gripped her. Up, and out of the spume she burst, gulping at the air, spitting salt water and gulping again. The sky reeled and the air scorched her lungs, but its sharpness brought unimaginable relief. Sand grains stung her cheek as the wind slapped her face. Was it scolding her for taking the natural world so lightly when she first dipped into the sea? A frenzy of goosebumps surged from her head to her toes as she leant into the protective chest of her rescuer. Losing its power, the rogue wave churned ahead of them as if cursing her for her narrow escape, while her hero tightened his grip around her waist, carrying her to safety.
Hello, this is my friend Caroline, who's just started reading Lady Hartley's Husbands.
Yes, I've just started reading it. So can you tell me a bit more about the story?
Well, you know now that it's initially set in Cornwall, just before the outbreak of the Second World War. And it's all about a young girl called Reenie Meadows, who falls in love with Morgan, the local farmhand. But her mother has ambitions for her, and together with a move to London, the romance falls apart. Reenie bitterly declares that love just doesn't work for her, so she's going to go for a wealthy husband instead. After a few setbacks and challenges, she achieves her goal. And the wealthy husband she marries is very, very much older than her. And sadly, the marriage is soulless. She realizes that wealth and social standing don't necessarily bring the joy that she'd hoped for. Eventually, she becomes the wealthy widow, and this is when the tables are turned. Chris Pensell seeks her out. He is very much younger than her, and everyone can really guess what his motivation is. But everyone except for Reenie. This is when the novel becomes a bit of a psychological thriller. And I think if I'm going to tell you any more, I shall be delivering spoilers. So I'll probably have to stop just here.
So Andrea, what inspired you to write your novel?
Oh, that's a good question. It was actually when I was travelling on a train from Truro to Exeter, and somebody pulled out their mobile phone just behind me. I heard them saying, "You need to be careful, Elizabeth. People are beginning to talk." I thought, that sounds like a good start to my novel. That was the spark that ignited it, because I had for a while had the story swimming around inside my head, but that's what started it.
So why did Reenie move from Cornwall to London?
Well, there's a simple answer to that. Her father had a promotion from overseeing the docks in Falmouth to the London docks,
Right.
especially important at that time because war was imminent. So it was a promotion he didn't want to turn down.
Oh, I see. So how do you make your characters so real?
Well, it's a funny thing with characters. They're inside your head for so long that they are real to you. You know, you hold conversations with them. You know what they like doing, saying, eating, drinking. You know them inside out. So I think that helps when it comes to writing about them. Also, Reenie, all the characters, but I'm thinking particularly of Reenie, she is flawed, and that makes you resonate with her. Be no good if she was a goody two-shoes. Bottom.
Yes. So, Andrea, how did you set your novel in its historical timescale?
Well, I use time markers, if you like, call them signposts. So the first one, it does cover quite a broad time scale from 38 to 1971. So one of the earliest time markers was Edward's marriage to Mrs. Simpson. Then there was one of Elizabeth Taylor's marriages. Then I used the first moon landing. That's a significant one. And perhaps one of the last ones was the decimalisation of money. Then there's all the references to interiors and the devil's in the detail, really. So, I did quite a lot of research into fashions and details, that sort of thing, to put it into an historical context.
So, Andrea, can you tell me a bit more about the research you did for your book?
Yes, of course. Google came into its own. I use Google so much to research events, things like, bomb damage during the war, repairs after the war to the Falmouth station and dockyard, but research into buildings. So there was a huge cinema built just in or near Grays during that time, and really referred to it as Buckingham Palace. So Google was invaluable, but it didn't just depend upon Google. I had memories from my own childhood, memories of my parents and my grandparents telling me things. So an example of that was my grandmother talking about the doodlebugs coming over in the war, and how when the doodlebug actually fell silent, that was when you feared most of all for your life. So those sort of details came in. The research was, well, not just about events, but fashions in clothing, interiors. I remember so well my grandparents' terraced house with the polished tiles in the porch, and the parlour kept reserved for special occasions, special visitors only. Those sort of things were all part of my research, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Yeah, I loved doing it.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned something about the tea party that.
Oh yes. Well, sometimes I would slip in little bits that actually happened to me in my childhood, or the stories that were told to me, and I think that helps to authenticate the story and give it, a better historical context. But this is more about characters. So when Lizzie, that's Reenie's sister, wants to introduce her family to her fiance's family, they go for afternoon tea. And Reenie's mother, who is by now an arch snob, is the one who unfortunately has the cup with the handle stuck to it. So you can guess what I'm going to say. The handle separated from the cup and the tea went into her lap. And ever after that, I think the in-laws were a bit hard to accept by Reenie's mother, I'm afraid. So yeah, that's all part of my research. Not just Google, but family memories as well.
So how long did it take you to write it?
Well, initially, I had the story sitting inside my head, going round and round, trying to work it out, talking to the characters in the story. So all that's going on first of all. But after I'd written the first draft, I gave it to some friends to read. And the trouble with friends is that they're too kind. They're very kind about my novel, but I realised something wasn't right with it. Just could not put my finger on it. What was wrong? So I went to a literary agency that put me in touch with a mentor editor who was excellent, Terry Nixon. She pushed the structure into shape and sorted my antagonists for me. But that meant an awful lot of rewriting. I rewrote almost all of the second half of the book, rewrote and rewrote to push it into shape. So it actually took quite a long time, because in between times I moved house, left it for a while, wrote a young adult novel and came back to it after my mentor had helped me sort it out. So all told, from the very first thoughts to the last word on the page, I would say it took about 8 years.
Gosh. So tell me, Andrea, do you have another novel in mind under preparation?
Well, I have written another one, and I'm just in the process of editing it at the moment. This one is all psychological thriller, in which a tramp visits a household and then ends up staying very firmly within the household. Unexpected things happen. But before you can read that one, you'll need to read Lady Hartley's Husbands.
Lady Hartley's Husbands by Andrea Emblin. This is historical fiction. The book opens in 1930s Cornwall, moves on to London during World War II, and then on into the mid-20th century in the Cotswolds. It's a journey taken through the eyes of a particular family of a particular social class. And the book will really transport you to life in those past decades and what it was like for a family in those circumstances. And very especially for a young girl growing up with a controlling mother who has very fixed ambitions for her daughter, despite the family's humble origins. The story follows the daughter, Reenie Meadows, who starts to kick back against the restrictions that are imposed on her from a very early age. A world war disrupts everyone's ambitions, and Reenie ends up marrying a man who's very rich, but also many years older than her. By this point, disappointment has hardened her, and she decides her ambitions have been fulfilled. Yet somehow they haven't. It's her second marriage, many years later when she's widowed, where she knows that at last she's got it right. Or is she once again fooling herself into thinking her ambitions are at last fulfilled because she so desperately wants it to be true? She shuts her eyes to a creeping suspicion that something's not quite right. And then things get really crazy. With the backdrop of a sleepy Cotswold village and the restraints of strict social norms, it seems as though nothing really awful could possibly happen. But unease turns to fear and then to panic as reality hits. It's a powerful novel. It doesn't take the track you might expect. Its twists and turns will keep you guessing. And the changing social standards are fascinating to watch from the point of view of one family struggling to fit in. I recommend that you give this one a try. That's Lady Hartley's Husbands by Andrea Emblin.